"Attack!" the officer shouted, but the K9 didn't move. The powerful German shepherd stood still, staring into the trembling old man's eyes. What happened next silenced the crowd and broke every heart on the scene, and it changed everyone who witnessed it forever. It started like any ordinary patrol. A call came in just after noon: suspicious man near the playground. Officers were dispatched immediately. When they arrived, they found him, an elderly man, alone on a park bench near the swings, clutching an old duffel bag. Kids played nearby. Parents watched cautiously. He wasn't doing anything threatening, just sitting quietly, staring at the grass. But something about him raised alarm. His clothes were worn. His expression was distant. One officer asked him to stand and show what was in the bag. The man struggled to rise. His knees shook. He winced and held his side. I'm just resting," he said, voice trembling. But the officers weren't convinced. Another unit was called in for backup, this one with a K9. Within minutes, a patrol SUV arrived. The doors opened, and a powerful German shepherd stepped out, ready for command. The old man lifted his hand slowly, trying to ease the tension, but the officers' voices grew sharper. "Show us what's in the bag," one barked. The duffel sat at his feet, untouched. The man tried to speak, but words failed him. More children were ushered away from the playground. One officer placed his hand on his holster. Another radioed dispatch. Then came the K9 officer, tall and stern, gripping the leash of the German shepherd who stood alert beside him. "Last warning, sir," the K9 officer shouted. "Comply now." When the old man hesitated, not from defiance but from fear, the command came loud and clear: "K9, go get him." The German shepherd lunged forward, muscles rippling, eyes locked. Bystanders gasped. But just before contact, something unexpected happened. The dog didn't bite. He stopped. And then he whimpered. Everyone stood frozen. The powerful K9 had surged forward with precision but, instead of attacking, skidded to a halt just feet from the old man. His ears perked. His growl faded into a confused whimper. He sniffed the air, then slowly tilted his head. The old man, trembling, whispered something barely audible: "Shadow." At the sound of that name, the dog backed up slightly, ears twitching. He let out another low whine, longer this time. His tail, once stiff with aggression, started to lower, then gave a faint wag. The K9 officer yanked on the leash. "What's wrong with him?" But Shadow wouldn't budge. Instead of aggression, there was recognition. Something in this frail, forgotten man had stirred a memory buried deep in the dog's mind. This wasn't just hesitation. This was familiarity and heartbreak. The old man slowly reached out a trembling hand, not afraid, not uncertain, just hopeful. "Shadow," he said again, tears forming in his eyes. "It's me. It's Frank." The German shepherd's body stiffened for a moment. Then, like something inside him clicked, he stepped forward cautiously, sniffing the man's coat. His nose brushed Frank's trembling fingers. And then he leaned in. Gasps echoed around the park as the fierce K9 sat down and rested his head gently on the man's lap. Frank broke down, his voice cracked as he whispered, "I thought they said you didn't make it, that you were gone." Officers stared, stunned. The K9 officer loosened his grip, eyes wide in disbelief. Shadow, the same dog trained for discipline, obedience, and combat, was now whimpering like a puppy, nuzzling the man who had once raised him. One officer quietly called in dispatch, requesting background checks on both the dog and the man. Minutes later, the truth came spilling out. Franklin Ward, retired military K9 handler, had been listed as missing and presumed dead after a bombing overseas 6 years ago. His entire unit was wiped out, or so they thought. Frank had survived but suffered traumatic brain injury and partial memory loss. With no ID and no records, he'd fallen through the cracks, homeless, forgotten. Meanwhile, his K9, Shadow, had been recovered separately, reassigned, and retrained for local law enforcement. No one had ever connected them until now. Officers lowered their weapons. The tension dissolved. Some backed away quietly, hands over their mouths in shock. Others stood motionless, witnessing something far greater than protocol. The dog they'd sent to subdue a stranger had just found the only person who ever truly meant home. Frank sat cross-legged on the grass, tears streaking down his weathered face as he stroked Shadow's fur. The once vicious K9 lay curled against him, like a child returning home after being lost for years. Neither moved quickly. They didn't need to. Time had frozen around them. Flashbacks hit Frank in waves, training drills in the desert, night patrols under foreign stars, whispered commands that Shadow always followed. He remembered the way Shadow would sleep beside him in the bunker, alert even in dreams. He remembered. He shielded him from the shrapnel, shouting his name through the choking smoke before everything went dark. Shadow hadn't forgotten either. He nuzzled Frank's shaking hands, letting out a soft, familiar sigh, like a warrior finally at rest. Frank's laughter broke through his tears. "You never forgot me, not after all these years." And the dog hadn't, not for a moment. A crowd had formed at the park's edge, parents, kids, runners, shopkeepers. What began as a tense standoff had transformed into something unforgettable. Phones captured the moment as Shadow rested protectively beside Frank. Tears streaked down strangers' faces. A young boy murmured, "That dog knows him." A woman wept quietly into her palms. The K9 officer, still loosely gripping the leash, let it fall. "He's not mine anymore," he said gently. Within hours, the videos spread like wildfire. Headlines flooded the internet. Loyal K9 reunites with former handler in heartbreaking park scene. This wasn't just a dog defying orders, it was a bond that time, trauma, and training couldn't break. In a world of rules, Shadow chose love, and the world cried alongside him. Later, officials arrived, supervisors, a city lawyer, the K9 unit coordinator. The question loomed heavy but clear, what now? Shadow was still a working service dog, bound by duty, protocols, and a badge. But after what everyone had seen, rules felt insignificant. The K9 officer spoke up. "He's made his choice. So have we." Frank, sitting with Shadow on a blanket a stranger had offered, looked up, fear in his eyes. "You're not taking him, are you?" The commander crouched beside them, voice firm but kind. "No, sir. We're bringing him home." The crowd erupted in cheers. Shadow's tail wagged gently, as if he understood. Frank leaned his forehead against his old friend's. A decision was made, not in policy, but in hearts. For once, compassion outranked procedure, and the system bent toward what was right. Weeks later, Frank and Shadow settled into a modest veterans-assisted living community on the town's outskirts. The place wasn't grand, but it had warm meals, peaceful mornings, and a small yard for Shadow to roam. Frank got his first checkup in years, Shadow got a new collar, his original name etched beneath his badge. They slept soundly, side by side, as they once had. The staff cherished them. Neighborhood kids brought treats. Veterans opened up, sharing stories they'd long kept silent, inspired by Frank's resilience and Shadow's devotion. No one saw a homeless man or a fierce K9 anymore. They saw two survivors, two brothers forged in battle, two souls who'd found their way back to each other, not through orders or missions, but through a love that never faltered.